Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Susan Dominus and Dr. Lisa Damour. Thanks for joining us. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of nearly 400 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Susan Dominus has worked for the New York Times since 2007, first as a Metro columnist and then as a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine. In 2018, she was part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize for public service for its reporting on workplace sexual harassment. She won a Front Page Award from the Newswomen's Club of New York and a Michael George Heart of New York Award from the New York Press Club. She has studied as a fellow at the National Institutes of Health and Yale Law School. Her 2024 article about menopause in the New York Times Magazine won a National Magazine Award that year, and she is a lecturer at Yale who teaches advanced journalism. Joining her is her friend and colleague, well, not colleague necessarily, but friend at a minimum. We're honored to welcome back Lisa Damour to FAN. Lisa is the author of 3 New York Times bestsellers, Untangled, Under Pressure, and the Emotional Lives of Teenagers, which have been translated into 20 plus languages. She co-hosts the Ask Lisa podcast, works in collaboration with UNICEF, and is recognized as a thought leader by the American Psychological Association. Lisa authored the monthly adolescence column for the New York Times, is a regular contributor to CBS News, and created a really fascinating platform called Untangling 10 to 20. It's a digital library of premium content to support teens and those who care for them. So let's welcome now Sue Dominus and Lisa Damour to FAN.
Thank you, Lonnie. Always great to be back with you and the wonderful, massive, fabulous program you have developed here. All right, Susan, let's talk about your book. It's such a good book. It is such a page turner. And, if you're interested in people and families, this book sheds light on things that I don't think have really been explored before. So thank you for it. I just want to say that out of the gate.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me this evening. I want to thank Lonnie and FAN. It's such a pleasure to be here, but to be here with you in particular, I'm sorry, there's a mosquito flying around, is just so much fun. So I'm thrilled.
Well, this will be fun. Okay. So I think it's really important to start with the question of why did you write this book, right? It's a big thing to write a book. So what sparked your interest in writing this particular book?
So I think I started researching this book in a way when I was very young. My parents used to go away on these big work trips, and they would leave each of the 3 siblings with a different family we were close to. And I stayed with close friends whose dinner table rituals were very different from ours. So in my house, the big rule was that you had to chew with your mouth closed, and that was sort of where things began and ended. But in this family that I really adored, the father would, sort of sit down over a glass of wine and a meal and say to one of his sons, so Peter, tell me, if a plane is leaving Cleveland and is flying 1,000 miles an hour, and another one is going the opposite direction and leaves at this time, when would they cross? He's creating these very elaborate mind, math in your mind games. And they would discuss current events over dinner. It was just a very different vibe from, I think, most households. And part of me was a little bit like, is this what every other family in my town is doing over dinner? And we're just the only ones who aren't. And I became kind of a familyologist. I got very interested in, I kind of glommed onto stories about the Kennedys and the things that they did over dinner. Once one child would present on a topic like Algeria, and then the other kids would be expected to be prepared and grill that student. So that sibling rather. So it was, I just became this familyologist is what I say. And because I myself was a weirdly motivated, dreamy kid, I was curious about what it was in family environments that sometimes, led kids to this kind of siblings to great achievement. And I was just curious it was just a curiosity that stayed with me basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay. So this book, which I think people know, but just to give a quick recap, you found a bunch of families where more than one sibling had achieved really quite remarkable things, and across a lot of different domains, a lot of different kinds of families, and brought your incredible sensibility and your journalistic understanding to really trying to figure out big themes, repeated findings, what you saw. You also have a ton of research in here that you translate far better than anyone of us on the clinical or academic side ever do, right? I mean, I think there's, a short list of very, very excellent journalists who do such a beautiful job of translating the science, and you are on that short list for sure. So thinking first about like the parents in these families, right? Like, what did you, when you got through this book, like what was sort of like what were they doing that accounts for the unusually high levels of success of more than one of their children?
Well, maybe I'll start by talking about how I went about trying to answer that in the book. So what the book basically does is take you inside. I talked to lots and lots of families, and eventually I landed on 6 families whose stories I really wanted to tell, whose siblings I thought were extraordinary. And I should start by saying it's somewhat idiosyncratic. In other words, you could say, well, why did you pick these 6 families? And I think the best answer is because I admired them. They embodied values that I personally admire. There's civil rights activists, there's artists, there's innovators. I was very interested in families, not where kids just achieved in a very conventional way, which is also, wonderful, but families whose kids had kind of dreamed really big and had, believed they could write the great American novel, or they could they could be an Olympic athlete, which is incredible to me that, the Groff family, which is the first chapter, had both of those things. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the kinds of families they were entrepreneurs, they were people, they were trailblazers. So there's 6 families, and then those chapters alternate with sort of stories about social science that kind of relates to the families, but also tells the family stories of the scientists themselves, who are often quite high achieving and have their own family motivations for why they study. So hopefully that'll give people a shape of things. But and so I really spent a lot of time, and it took a long time to see these common threads, because it wasn't like they all had rules about the library. Like each kid had to take out 6 books. I was interested in those kinds of rules, and things like that did come up, like the Hollifields, this wonderful family of civil rights activists from Tallahassee. Like when they went to the library, they had to take out 2 fiction and 2 nonfiction books. Just the mom did have she was encouraging something. But the things that I really found were a little bit more about psychological mindset, I would say, than actual rituals. It was things like a tremendous sense of optimism. That was something that I saw in a lot of these families. It was, they had these expressions, in the Murguia household, the mom used to say, with God's help, all things possible, which was kind of, I loved that sentiment, but also, when I spoke to Marilyn Hollifield, she told me that in her family, the informal motto was all things possible. So just the fact that 2 of these families had such similar language kind of at their fingertips, it made me think that that was kind of an important phenomenon. So I think, yeah, and that really resonated with me. And when I talk about that, I also want to emphasize having an attitude where all things are possible is different from making your kids feel like, it's not, I like the idea, like you can reach for the moon rather than there's the moon, go reach for it. There's this expectation of it. Create the sense of possibility, but without the expectation or the demand. I think it's this like beautiful balance of support without pressure. If you want to do it, it's yours. If you don't want to do it, that's fine too.
Okay, support without pressure, right? I mean, that's a beautiful construction of like what it is we're trying to achieve in family life, right? Support our kids, but not to the degree that they feel now an obligation, or that they're doing it for our purposes, not theirs.
Or that if they don't do it, they will be like letting the family down. But more just, I had a friend who once said to me that his parents had low expectations, or just didn't, and he had big dreams, but then the lift of making that happen was so much harder, without their support. It's hard to have big dreams if people around you aren't saying like, yeah, go for it. And actually Lauren Groff's mother went to Franklin and Marshall at a time when very few women were getting medical degrees, but she was a whiz and had won all sorts of fellowships and had worked in a chemistry lab while literally choreographing the marching band for Penn State. I mean, she's an incredible woman, but she sort of stalled out in her pre-med because her own family said to her when she got discouraged, like, oh, I don't know, maybe you should drop out. And I think so. I don't know. I think that was not going to happen with her kids. Certainly, she was not going to make that mistake with her own kids.
Well, it's sort of also all things possible is also like we believe in you, right? Like we believe that you can do the things you want to do, right? It's such a beautiful way
I
to
love it, but I almost love that. Yeah, I think that's totally true. And it's also just a general sense of the world is filled with wonder and you can be part of that. And, the funny thing about optimism, I think it's hard to fake it, if you don't have it. And I think in a lot of these families, the parents themselves had overcome tremendous hardship and were extraordinary people in their own right. So they went through life thinking, I'm amazed at where I have landed. Like, and the kids see that. And so then there's a sense that, well, look, all things possible. Look what mom did. Mom started a nursing school for Black women at a time when there were none in this entire state, yeah, their stories are quite inspiring very often.
Okay, so the parents, optimistic, all things possible. What else did you see across these families that you felt were some threads that you could pull?
I mean, this was something I saw a little bit less in the families, but there was one study that really resonated with me that I think about a lot. Because sometimes it's hard to actually find parenting effects in studies because it's hard to tease out nature versus nurture and genetic effects and things like that. But this was a randomized controlled trial. They basically sent, parents don't know. It's important that kids take math classes for as long as they can, just because if you don't, it closes a lot of doors. If you stop math in 10th grade, then at 10th grade, you've decided you're not going to be a chemist or a pharmacist or whatever, it's harder to go that way. So we like to encourage kids to take as much math as possible. But when kids go to parents and say, why should I study math? I'm not going to be a mathematician. Research shows that parents don't tend to have great answers. So some researchers tried to go ahead and help parents encourage their kids, not just to say it's because it'll help you get into college or just because it's good for you. And they really encourage them to connect that thing, math or STEM, to something that the kid valued. So we put a lot of, parents think oh, I have to set expectations high. No, really, you need to, create a motivation by connecting to your child's values. So it's really about knowing your child. And I think a lot of great parenting comes down to knowing your specific child. So instead of saying, why should you take math? Well, because it will get you into college, or it's important, or I don't know, it seems like you should know it. It's because, oh, well, you want to be a professional soccer player. And if you do become a professional soccer player, you really are going to need to watch your finances because, those are some big numbers that are going to be rolling in and you're going to want to be able to stay on top of that. Or you want to understand how to pick the best phone plan. Like you want us to get you a phone. Well, you're going to need math to think about it. So it's really connecting to the kids' values, the kids' motivations. You're not squashing their dreams. You're not telling them to be practical. You're just connecting to something that they value. So I loved that research. And then the other thing that I came across, which I'm sure you're very familiar with this research, but we know that when parents intervene with kids, it can be very demotivating. So even in very young children, if they're doing puzzles, let's say, and a researcher jumps in and finishes the puzzle or helps too quickly, it's demotivating for that child, even hours later with another puzzle. It's a great metaphor, I think, for parenting in general. And so I do think that there is something to be said for stepping back and making sure that the child's intrinsic motivation, it's almost like this little pilot light that, you want to give just enough air to let it build into a flame, but you don't want to blow on it and just blow it right out. And so I think a lot about, again, another family in the book is the Paulus family. Again, kind of thing I admire. Diane Paulus is an innovative, one of the most successful female directors on Broadway. She does opera. She's just, very innovative work. And her sister is a harpist at a world-class orchestra in Mexico, and her brother helped found this important media company. Anyway, her mother used to go with her when she was as a young girl. She was already dancing in the American Ballet Theater, sometimes with Baryshnikov. And her mother would come every night to every performance. And she would stand in the back, even if she was exhausted. Her mother worked very hard. And Diane said that her mother had a way of watching without desire, which is a phrase that I find so beautiful. Again, it's that idea of you're there for your child, you're enabling it, you're there to take her home and know that, she is not just a professional or a talent, she's a child, she's your child. But Taruko Paulus's own desires were not smothering her daughters. She was there to be a support, not a critic, not a coach. I think a lot of these families are great at having home be a warm, nurturing environment and finding mentors, coaches, even if it's a neighbor, just people they admire, let them do the hard, or they outsource the grit, and home is like a safe space. I think I saw that a lot also. So those are some of the themes that in the parents.
Beautiful, right? I mean, such good parenting guidance. As you're talking, the phrase that came to mind is like, it's investment, but not narcissistic investment.
Well, that's exactly right. And of course, Diane said she did see a lot of, you're dancing as a professional, like we've all seen those movies. Like there was a lot of narcissism. There was a lot of stage mothering going on. And I think that can really kill, a young person's love of whatever it is. I mean, Andre Agassi, obviously his book Open is so extraordinary. If anyone's interested in reading it, it's a beautiful memoir of this, champion tennis player. And his father, did make him into a champion tennis player, but at the cost of the relationship, right? So
and that it was an extension of the father, that it was like, you will do this as an extension of my narcissistic dream or wish. Is that
yes, absolutely. And he was very, very controlling. And there was, I would say, I think Andre felt like he had no will or say in any of it. And, this is the question that I think parents have to really grapple with themselves. Like, what is it that they want? Do they want their children to get into the school of their dreams or make that goal at the expense of their relationship? I just, and I like it does, I think, often take a toll, and I think if they could step back, they would say, like, of course, the relationship is the most important thing. They think that they're doing it for the kid's sake, the kid will be happier when, but parenting is a fleeting moment in your life. I know that all too well. Now, I'm an empty nester. And kids, I just think, frankly, parents rarely succeed at making their kid anything anyway. And so you could spend the entirety of their adolescence trying to make them grittier, make them harder working, make them try harder, make them work more on their college essays, whatever it is. And then the next thing you know, they leave and you have squandered that precious time with them, which is really what is most important to them, to their well-being, to their ultimate health even. And you've deprived yourself of that as well.
I mean, like, these are very like big philosophical, profound ways of thinking about what is our role as parents? Like, what do we want for our children? And I love that you sort of brought together all of these families who found a way to do it that can serve as a model, right, for just supporting kids, and it's not necessarily that, the goal is that they're all going to shoot the lights out, but just supporting them. There's a phrase we use. I'd be interested to see if you feel like this is an oversimplification or actually like kind of on the money. That parents are shepherds, not engineers, is something that we'll sometimes say. Does that feel like it gets it?
It's beautiful. I mean, and Alison Gopnik would say that they are gardeners, not carpenters. You're not building your kid into something that, you can control the shape and size of. They're going to grow the way they're going to grow, and you're going to tend to them and you're going to water them. I mean, I should say I'm realizing there is a family in the book, and we can talk about them a little bit more, which is the Chen family, whose children grew up in Appalachia. The parents were Chinese immigrants. They ran a Chinese restaurant. They worked very, very hard. And their mother did extraordinary things, had this tremendous force of will to get them those resources. She, outsourced, but home was not a safe environment. And she was verbally abusive and sometimes physically abusive. And it took me a long time to really hear what the kids were telling me. It was hard for me to really hear it because it's painful, But I think they would probably say that she did a lot for them, but also held them back in some ways, and that the relationship suffered, and that the cost and the pain of that, as successful as they are, and we can talk more about the details, but
They're very successful. Yeah.
but I think that's, I know one of them certainly told me two of them did say, yeah, it's in me, it's there. And for example, it was very important to her, not for kind of cliche reasons, but for personal reasons, that her children really love music and be skilled in music. And that was something that she would be abusive about if she thought they weren't practicing. And the youngest son told me that, if anything, it stopped him from really loving or caring about music. He got lots and lots of training, but it was only when he left home and went to Dartmouth that he could actually become a musician. He had to
Because it
get
was so anxiety ridden with
it was
yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, I know somebody else who just dad, very important that he become an accomplished pianist. And he was a virtuoso piano by the time he was 18. And then he left home and he never played again. Yeah. It's a delicate.
Yeah.
Obviously, abuse, it's like bright line rules, never okay. But I think we all struggle with
how hard to push. I mean, how hard to push, right? I mean, I've got 2 kids, right? Like, how hard do you push them?
I personally, I've never had that much luck pushing. It's always seems to backfire personally. Maybe I'm not a pusher. So maybe, and that maybe informs what I was seeing in these families. But it's, I think I think certainly one does have to be conscious of when your emotions, I mean, Lisa, I quote, I'm sure I'm not going to get it quite right, but I quote you all the time saying, when you want something more than your kid does, or your emotions are bigger around something, that's when you have to really watch yourself. And I think a lot of parents on the sides of a soccer field are feeling bigger emotions than their kids are. And so I myself was a soccer mom, and, I thought a lot about Chiruko Paulus on those sidelines and really tried to figure out what was going on with me and how could I be more like her,
And it was watch without desire, or what was the phrase?
Watch without desire.
Watch without desire. Okay, so that's the parents. Talk to us about the siblings, because I think the great leap forward that this book does is it starts to really bring across thinking about the impact of siblings on one another, which we have barely looked at as psychologists.
Yeah, and actually, if you don't mind, you expressed it so beautifully in an interview I did with you, but tell me why you think that is. Why have we overlooked siblings to such a degree?
So I think I actually don't know. I actually really don't know. I think our theory base, the sort of the historical theory was Freud.
Yeah.
The origins of this, and the impact of parenting, actually mothering. It was actually, Freud wasn't even parenting, it was mothers on raising children. Now, of course, there was no theory before that. So, I mean, I was trained psychoanalytically, I'm not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So before Freud, there was no theory. And then there was theory of, what is the impact of family life? What is the impact of early childhood experiences on adult personality, right? That's not a small thing to actually start to sketch out if it was not there before. That, I think, became the dominant view of things, and really set us down a path. And then as psychoanalytic theory fell out of favor, it was taken over by cognitive behavioral theory, which actually is not actually that oriented to family life questions all that much, right? I mean, it's much more thinking and feeling and how we talk about those things. And so I sort of feel like it's just kind of been this neglected area. And so I want to hear what you started to pull together, what I would say is theory, about how these things work. The other thing I will say is there's also the world of sibling birth order. And so, in my world, we're we got questions about that. And I know you spent a lot of time going through the research on that and have, a very, 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 strong grasp of it. So talk to me about what you did find, but also talk to us about the sibling birth order stuff, because that really, that is out there. And
I think it's people's primary framework for how they understand dynamics. And it's, in some ways it's a fun one. It's almost like an astrological reading.
Yeah.
You can, but yeah, I mean, what I say in the book is that I feel like parents are the ones who launch kind of an arrow of ambition into the air. But when it comes time to guide it or help it land somewhere, so there's this very practical aspect of being a sibling, which is I think they can help you figure out where practically that arrow should land. So, because the parents can't see into the future, the way that siblings can, because they're generationally a generation ahead of their parents. And so there's a very funny moment in one of the chapters when, I mean, I was reporting it so many years ago that this will tell you how long ago I started reporting it. But there were two siblings who were chatting about a job that one of them wanted. And the father was a double PhD in sociology and biology, but the reference was about AI. And she just turned to her dad and said, "But you don't understand that, Daddy," like that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
she could at that point, and her brother could. And for me, it was really always, I think, on my mind, because when my brother was so influential in helping my arrow land where it did, when I was 14, my brother came home from college. He was visiting, and he was 6 years older than I am. And I definitely looked up to him. And he said, "Susie, I think you should join the high school newspaper." He'd gone to my high school, public high school. And I was like, "Oh, I was reading a book. We don't have a high school newspaper. It fell apart." And then my brother did this whole that's an outrage, and every high school needs a newspaper, and the decline of democracy and apathy. And, so he basically harangued me into agreeing to start the high school newspaper. I was a third child. I'm going to use birth order, but I was kind of passive, because I was used to other people making things happen. They were older. But somehow he saw something in me. He knew I loved to write. Maybe he knew I was curious. And so I did start the high school newspaper. And the minute those first articles started trickling in, it was like, oh yeah, this is exactly where I belong. I really knew it right away. So I was interested in that kind of thing. And I did see that in the families. So often it was a sibling who recommended a college or a graduate program. Or, for example, the Murguia family, there were these 4 siblings who grew up in a family of 9 in a 2.5-room house in Kansas City, Kansas. And the youngest 4 were all kind of stars who all went to law school. And so because they'd all gone to law school, they could really help each other professionally, and they would get together regularly on Sunday nights and not just catch up and laugh and tell stories, which they did as well, but really strategize about, they were almost like this incredibly tight network. And of course, when they got to University of Kansas as Mexican-American kids, it was really important that they had each other. We know so many first-generation low-income kids don't finish college, but because they had each other, they had this support system in place. So that was interesting to me. Do you want to talk about birth order?
Talk to us about birth order, because it's really out there. What's the deal with birth order?
I mean, I learned things I did not know before. But the thing about birth order is that when you look at it in terms of personality, like the big 5 personality traits, which is things like conscientiousness or extroversion, the largest, best conducted studies that control for, people's sort of ideas already, and other kinds of confounds, has really found that there is no birth order effect. The oldest child is not, in fact, even necessarily the most conscientious in their own family. The problem is the oldest child is developmentally the oldest, and so seems like the most conscientious. But if you were to take a 14-year-old whose older sister was 16, let's say, by the time that 14-year-old gets to be 16 or 19,
Yep.
she's probably just as conscientious, maybe even more conscientious, but they never get to be side by side the same age. So those impressions kind of get overlaid onto the family history and the family story, and it comes to explain everything that happens. But not only is that younger sibling less conscientious, but it's possible that the oldest sister, let's say, might not be particularly conscientious relative to the general population, when judged by independent evaluators rather than their own family. So birth order effects kind of disappear when you do the research right. But there is this other wrinkle that is also really consistent that I would have guessed was something that parents or kids also kind of laid at the feet of the oldest child, but wasn't really true. And that's this like consistent cognitive edge that we see in the firstborn child. And again, everything is always on average. I am the youngest of three.
Yep.
Clearly, that does not apply in my family, but maybe it does. But it's also we know it's true by age 1. So the oldest child has a slight cognitive advantage at age 1 relative to the second and third kids at age 1. And we think it's some of the best evidence we have for how important those early months are for enrichment, because the oldest child is an only child was the only one who's an only child at all. And all the parental focus and all the singing, laughing, talking, reading, eye contact, all of that happens with the first child for longer, and the parents can want to be as fair and loving to all their children, but they can't make themselves have more time.
Yep. You have another kid running around, like it's a distraction. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and that's true. So that was thought to be true across the board. And then there's some thinking that, younger siblings are overrepresented in elite sports. Well, why would that be? Well, maybe it's just because the older sibling got started with soccer sooner. So, the younger one, it's the balls hanging around, or they're forced to play up with their sibling. But there's also the thinking that younger siblings, deliberately differentiate from their older siblings because that academic lane has been taken. The kids already got a cognitive edge, plus they're 2 years older developmentally or whatever it is.
Like, can't compete with that. Yeah.
And so the Groff family that I write about in the book, Sarah True, who became an Olympic triathlon and Ironman champion, incredible athlete. She felt like her siblings were fantastic students and that they didn't care as much about the sports. And so if she focused on that could be a place where she really excelled. So she was very conscious of it. She has like very vivid memories of like making that choice. So I think that's super interesting too.
That is. You in the end, like, I don't know if it was while writing the book or in sort of looking at it after the fact, socioeconomic status plays differently, right? In terms of the impact of sibling relationships. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, even just to get back to the cognitive edge, only recently did they realize that in families in which English is a second language, or really, I think it's really at-risk families maybe, but certainly in families where the English is a second language, the birth order effect of that cognitive edge disappears, or the second child or the third child has it. And they think it's because the parents are better understanding the resources available to them in terms of preschool and just interacting. They understand like even like where is the library? They just are more plugged in. But also the younger sibling is benefiting from the increasing language fluency of the older sibling who is catching up and struggling to sort of integrate in whatever way. So that's one way that we see a difference. Somebody, Annette Leroux, do you know her work? She wrote a book called Unequal Childhoods. She found that in addition to, because of the resource differences in middle-class families and beyond, the middle, upper class, compared to working class or very poor families, siblings tend to be more similar in terms of the activities that they do when there's not a lot of resources to go around because there's no one there to like shuttle them around.
You can't be here and there. Yeah.
And also the parents maybe are working such long hours that the kids spend a lot more time together. So what you see is that sibling effects are more powerful in disadvantaged families. So there's something called a sibling spillover effect. And I'll tell you about this study that was people really stood up and paid attention when this was published. A woman named Emma Zhang at Yale published this, but she basically looked at kids who benefited from, just by chance, being old for their grade. We know for the most part, especially in disadvantaged communities, being old for your grade really helps. You're developmentally farther along. The teachers like you better. School's a more positive experience. All sorts of positive things happen from that. And what she saw was that the younger children of those kids who benefited from, the younger siblings of those kids who benefited from being old for their grade also did better than expected, regardless of where they fell in their grade age-wise. Yeah, exactly. And so what that shows us is that, and this effect was more powerful in disadvantaged families in particular, probably because the siblings are closer, and families who are well-resourced can sort of fix situations different ways. But, and so what it tells us is that, if we can find interventions that help one sibling, you're actually getting more bang for your buck, because helping not just one kid, it's going to have spillover effects for the second kid as well. But spillover effects can work the other way too. So what we find, what she found was that in families that are very disadvantaged, where you do have more adverse childhood effects than in other communities, the kids, going along in school, trying to get good grades, let's say, and then something bad happens, some disruption, something upsetting. That young person's grades will suffer as a result of the disruption. The younger sibling exposed to the same trauma, let's say, that sibling's grades are also going to suffer, but that younger sibling's also going to suffer from the fact that her older sibling's grades suffered. So it's like a 1-2 punch. So it's just it really, because, and when you think about how closely grades and test scores predict income later on, you can see how the sibling effect can actually perpetuate economic inequality even. So this is like this big insight that came out of this study.
And what was their understanding of how the older siblings' poor grades impacted the younger sibling?
Well, that's the interesting thing is they talk about the mechanism, and by the way, I think it can go, I use that as an example, but I think it can go both ways.
Yeah.
I think it's not that different from, it's not totally understood, but the fact that they spend so much time together, right? That they spend more time together than kids in advantaged populations, just tells you that they're sort of rubbing off of each other. It could be that, it's almost easier to understand the positive effect, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's doing well in school, then they might think like, well, I can tutor you, or it's cool to be good in school.
Yeah.
I do think it's not that different, right? It's not cool.
It's just the other side of that coin.
You don't care about school.
Yeah.
And it's after she read elsewhere about the story with my brother, one of the people I write about in my book, her name is Julia Leonard. She's one of the researchers who does research on motivation in very young children. She sent me another study she had done that was looking at, it was set during the pandemic, and it was looking at from whom do adolescents take advice. And what they wanted to take advice, what was important to them was getting counsel and input from people who understood the task at hand and who knew them well. And the older they got in adolescence, the less likely that was to be their parents, and the more likely it was to be somebody like a sibling or a friend. But here you see siblings as filling that role. Like, just like my brother was like, well, high schools should have a newspaper, which was not on my parents' mind. You know what I mean? I think like the siblings understand, like, how do you get through life? How do you get through school? How do you get through whatever we're struggling with? I think siblings can do that for each other, and they value each other's opinions sometimes more than they do that of parents.
Funny, we're living this right now. So my younger daughter's about to start high school. My older daughter's a college junior, and our high school has the option of an IB track. And our older daughter did the IB track. And she's like, yeah, no, she should do it. Right. And so my younger daughter's like, I guess I'll do it. Right. And so, it just, it solves it for us as parents. Right. Because my older daughter, like, she did it. She knows exactly what's involved, and she could talk to her younger sister about what's involved. It's just, we can't have that kind of insight. We actually also, I think, you know, and I sometimes call it like the kiss of death problem. If we recommend it, she's not going to want to do it, right? Whereas if her big sister, who she loves, recommends it, you know, it's on the table. So
No, I love the kiss of death advice. I think that's it's like wise words to heed for parents who are like tell their children what to do. Yeah, it can definitely have the boomerang effect.
yeah,
It's you know, there's a really lovely story actually in the Paulus family about Diane Paulus. Diane Paulus's older sister. I mean, this to me was such a poignant parenting decision. Like, so we talk a lot about like parents pushing kids, right? You know, obviously that's never going to work out really well. But what about when the kid is 15 or 16 and that child wants to give up the joys of childhood in order to pursue a dream, right? Like if sometimes you have to make that decision at 13 or 14.
right.
Then a parent has to reckon with, is she old enough to make a decision that big? And she doesn't actually know what she'll be missing out on.
Yeah.
So Janet, so Diane Paulus's older sister, Janet, when she was 14, got a scholarship to go to Interlaken, which meant it was a boarding school. It was an incredible opportunity to study. I'm sorry, this like bug is flying around. To study music at a very high level. And it was her dream to be a professional musician, and off she went. But it was only later that she realized that once you leave home, as she put it, you really leave home and you can't get that time back. And at a certain point, Diane's parents were thinking about sending her away to some kind of high-end, you know, program. And Janet was the one, this is a really consequential decision, and said, I think you should keep her at home. And
like that she missed out.
yeah. And I think Diane was even kind of mad about it at the time, but now is really, really grateful. So again, like siblings can have insights, vision, personal experience that is so profound. And I do think Diane now would say she was really, really grateful. And I think Janet thinks it's one of the family dynamics or family moments that she's most proud of, is that she gave Diane those 4 extra years at home with the wonderful parents, especially since their mother went on to die quite young, actually. So,
To switch gears, I was looking again at your book today and really interested in the section on luck. And I pulled a sentence out, and I just want to like read it to you and then go any direction you want with this. But I was very taken by it. So much of what influences people's chances for success in life is not just discounted, but completely hidden from sight. What'd you learn?
well, you know, there's something that like, I think, you know, when I set out to do a book about uh, high achieving siblings, I really thought I was just going to go find like a bunch of amazing stories from parents about what they did and like what their advice
The
was.
ladies we served, and yeah.
How did it work? And I thought I was going to find parents who managed to inspire their kids without yelling at them, whatever. You know, as we discussed, what I actually found was that the parenting effect is smaller than we think it is. It's, of course, parenting matters. It matters in the moment. It's huge. It's, you know, our parents live in they forever take up space rent-free in our brains. There's no getting around that. But even still, the sort of decisions that loving parents make and agonize over, like whether to co-sleep or whether to have you know, a job wheel or, you know, that kind of thing, whether to have a behavioral motivation or whether to punish, you know, they don't actually affect the outcomes as much as we think they do down the road, because there is this thing called genes, you know, that are involved. But there's also this other thing called the environment, which is huge and includes everything from siblings to Fortnite to teachers to the neighborhood to whether your bedroom is sunny to things. Did you happen to catch, you know, an episode of a certain TV show that like inspired you, some nature program? I don't know. So parenting in the face of all of that is pretty small. And so luck applies, if we're really honest, to some degree to genetics, right? Like some kids are born, doesn't mean that kids who aren't naturally gifted at math can't become great at math, but for some kids, it's easier, you know, like that is just true. And there are
we use the term endowment, right? This kid has a strong endowment, right? I mean, that's what they're bringing to the table. And
And there are too many kids who
Yeah.
have that endowment and never get to express it because they don't have opportunity. And you see that, so in a weird way, you see genes expressing themselves the most in the communities where kids do have everything given to them. So that's when it's almost an even playing field and you can see who just sort of rises to the top. And sometimes that happens in families and it can be really fraught. I mean, it could be something else. It could be a gift for sports or whatever that family values, but it can be very painful. So there's luck, but there's also luck, did somebody get mono their senior year of college? And so they missed the the LSATs and their grades were terrible because they had to leave. And so they didn't go to that law school that is a feeder for, clerkships and so on. Like these things do matter, it doesn't mean you can't have a wonderful, happy life, but to get to be high achieving in the way that the people I'm writing about in this book are, a lot of things have to line up, and it's interesting because when it was all over, I looked back and I thought, oh my God, it's awful. All the parents in these families are actually still married. They were married like throughout the children's, lives. And it's not that obviously there are many incredibly high achieving people whose parents separated. But having that stability, I think, in other words, everything has to line up perfectly, including you not maybe spending your junior year of high school devastated because your parents are separating. Like these things can be consequential. So a lot, and having your parents be together, by the way, is of course, it's necessary, but not sufficient for success.
Right.
But nor is it necessarily necessary even, but
Yeah.
it would help, I would think, in some ways, just for the pure stability that lets you kind of focus on whatever it is that you want to focus on. So, so I do think luck matters. And also parents, I think, sometimes take credit for raising high achieving kids, and God bless them. I'm sure they did a lot right. Esther Wojcickis has two daughters, who one founded YouTube. She convinced Google to buy YouTube. She was the CEO of YouTube. Her name is Susan Wojcickis, incredible leader who tragically died recently, like way too young. And her sister Ann Wojcickis started the company 23andMe, amazing women in tech, like who, two of the most extraordinary women in Silicon Valley. And her mom wrote this book called How to Raise Successful People. And I think her mom is both incredible and underestimating the fact that they were growing up in Silicon Valley, like right at the moment when people were exploding with ideas. Their neighbors were Nobel Prize winners. Their dad was the head of the physics department at Stanford. You know what I mean? So they were talented, they were ambitious, and they also had a lot else going for them.
I mean, that's genetics, that's environment, that's all of it coming together, yeah, in a really powerful way. Okay, so you are the mother of fraternal twin boys.
Yes.
Talk to us about how that maybe shaped your approach to the book, and also talk to us about how the experience of writing this book shaped your approach to your boys.
I think I came to realize, I think I came to realize that the parents I admired the most were the ones like Taruko Paulus, who were stepping back and who were, letting the kids themselves find their paths. And, when you have fraternal twins, it's very humbling about parenting because one of my kids, I think I've told you this, was just voted the head of his social chair of his fraternity at a, large state school. So like hardcore fraternity social chair, terrific school, is at the University of Wisconsin. Couldn't be prouder.
But it's like a Greek system. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Twin brothers' idea of Greek life is studying ancient Greek. 400 students called St. John's College, where they literally sit around and read like hard copies of the great books, and like they're sitting around reading Aristotle and talking about that over lunch, so we fed them the same food. We read them the same books. They're both wonderful. We couldn't be, we like to think that, but it's because of us that they're both really kind, decent people. You know what I mean? But the truth is we don't get to take credit for that because I can't explain how they're so different otherwise. So, I mean, being a mother of twin, I think I was more receptive to this idea is that there's a lot of luck involved and there's only so much you can control because I kind of saw it with my own eyes. So I think a lot of the parents who have these high achieving kids, it's also just luck that maybe they had 3 kids who happen to be, what I really see are the ingredients for success: conscientiousness, very bright, and very agreeable, very outgoing and warm and confident. Like, to be really high achieving, you kind of, at least in the things I was interested in, you sort of need to be firing on all cylinders because you have talent, but then you have people rooting for you also.
Well, that's when you like line those things up, conscientiousness and agreeableness. And what was the other one? It was
Well, very bright, but even extroversion is associated to some degree.
yeah. I mean, what I hear is, a teacher's dream, right?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
and kids are at school all day.
It's so true.
And, to get that kind of feedback from, teacher after teacher after teacher, like, it's very fortunate, right? To be a kid who just, comes to the table with those things. And then the world, schools are built to support those things.
Exactly. Yeah. And too many schools are sorting machines in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, they don't help you grades get better. They just tell you what they are, And so it's funny. I think one of the ways that disadvantage is like perpetuated the most is that, parents with resources are sophisticated about, you're right. School is so much more a part of a kid's environment at the end of the day at a certain point than home life, because they just been so advocating for that teacher or pushing your kid towards the sport with the amazing, loving, but tough coach, rather than letting the sport guide the decision. I think those are choices that parents who really have it together it's like kind of a luxury to be able to navigate that. In the case of the Chens, the oldest sister did that for them. Sometimes the siblings can step in and say, this is a great coach and you should work with
Go
it.
this way.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I know we're close to the end. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you just sort of feel like really important to say about this book or your process of writing it or what you learned along the way?
I think if parents come away with anything after reading it, I hope it is a sense of not pressure that they should be better at raising high achieving kids, but appreciating more how much things they can't control, like the sibling relationships or the sibling dynamics or the impulse to differentiate, or just the world at large, and the role of luck. I hope that parents don't read the book and think, oh no, I have a checklist. I mean, there's some really positive things in there. As we discussed, finding motivation that connects to your child's values or creating a sense of possibility. I love those for any family, but I don't think parents have to feel like there's a checklist of things that they should be doing that they're not doing that would make all the difference. It's parenting, as we called it, a journey inside the mystery of sibling success. There's a lot of mystery to child rearing, and we can't pretend to know those answers.
It's a wonderful book. And
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, what I like about it, and this feels like really a hard thing to do, and you did it, to write a book about sibling success without it seeming to be like, here's the secret formula, right? Or here's, like, to explore it as a phenomenon in its own right, to go and this is what you as a journalist bring to this, is a sort of this like agnostic view of it, right? Like, you didn't go in with like, I'm gonna come up with the answers and tell everybody what the answers are, right? Like, you're like, what's this all about? Like, what's happening in these environments where we're seeing all of these like really, unusually successful kids? And what's so neat about it is it's just another way of being curious about family life, like, and the phenomenology within it. And it's just amazing stories, right? I think that's really what it is like, these are amazing stories.
I really wanted people to feel that they were reading almost, little novellas, within the book.
Yeah.
More just to say that it read they're all true stories, fact checked, but that it read like fiction. That was my hope. And that you get these delicious, intimate, sometimes funny, sometimes very moving bird's eye view of what was happening deep inside a family culture. But then you also pull out and say, and by the way, this is how things actually work at the level of mechanism, or here are things that we know are effective, that these parents were consciously or not, employing. So I really did go into it thinking, oh, this is going to be so great. I'm going to find out, how Wendy Wasserstein, the playwright, and her brother, Bruce, the financier, and their sister, the mark, we're going to find out how their parents did it. And I didn't find that, but I found out a lot of other really interesting things that I am so glad I had the opportunity to pursue.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for this book, Susan.
Thank you for supporting it and me.
Lisa, thank you so much for thoughtful, insightful, pulling so many threads of Susan's book out for everybody watching. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. We know you're really busy and really always glad to have you as part of the fan family. Always, always, always. So thank you so much for that. Susan, it's such a great book where we just fell in love with you the minute we met you, and it's been just so great getting to know you a little bit more every month in our conversations. So we look forward to a really robust after hours. So, about that after hours, we've been dropping links in chat throughout the conversation to buy a copy of the book at our partner bookseller, The Bookstall. You buy a copy, and in your email receipt, you will see a link to register for after hours, where Sue will answer every question you have about everything, because she's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist.
Part of a large team.
A large team. There you go. Of course. Yeah.
And humble.
Of course. Of course. So come hang out, come ask questions, and Fan will gift a second copy of the book to everyone at After Hours. We're sure that you have probably a sibling or someone that who has a sibling who would be interested in this book. So come hang out with us. We'd really appreciate it. We're at 7:57. So I want to ask you, there were two questions actually, if you don't mind, and we'll kind of jump in. One question was submitted ahead of time, and it has crossed my mind a couple times as well. Which a woman named Jamie, or perhaps a gentleman named Jamie, had asked, were there any findings specific to blended families and their experiences where you have siblings who are not necessarily DNA aligned?
So I can't point to a specific study about that, but it's an interesting question to raise because it's actually one of the reasons why sibling research has not been as robust as it has not been that robust. Sibling permutations are so complicated, right? You have different gender, you have age discrepancies, you have blended families, and it's, some people say that every sibling grows up in a different family, but there's also almost as if every family has a different kind of sibling composition. Yes. So that's one of the main stumbling blocks to really, really good sibling research.
And then kind of another side of that question from someone else who was here, Christiana, about only children, and then it was also kind of drilled a little bit earlier too, ahead of time, which is if you're an only child, if you're raising an only child, do you see any phenomenon, or do you have any insight into phenomenon where there's kind of like the adopted older brother or older sister or younger in that case, where I have no siblings, does that mean I'm doomed to not being successful because I have none of that the sibling glow that is possible for me? Do you see kind of what's the replacement theory there, though that's a really bad term, but you know what I mean?
Well, I have two thoughts about that. And one is, it's true that that siblings do provide support, advice, resources, a network. They can do all those things. However, what they don't have is the full focus and attention of the parents and all of the resources of the parents. So, you see what it does for just 1 year of a kid's life to have all of the parents' attention. I have to think it's highly compensatory to have parents who are pouring all of their heart and soul and, again, financial resources into one child. I think that is its own kind of edge. As for the other part of it, I think that obviously cousins can be a great substitute. My own son is staying with his much older cousin in Los Angeles right now, and I love it. The more he spends time with his older cousin, the happier I am, because I know he will listen to that kid for advice.
That's right.
Kid. So yeah, I'm so happy about that.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure at another point in time, Dr. Damour could tell us a couple of case histories of only children where that was maybe not so great. All that focus, all that time and energy.
A lot.
Like, woo! Like, yes, benefits, sort of. Anyway, thank you so much, Lisa. Hope to welcome you back again. Have a great spring and summer. And Susan, we're going to give Susan a 5-minute break. We'll open up the after hours room at about 8:05. Thanks everybody for joining.